I told my husband he should have just married a white woman. So I'm a black woman, my husband's white. And this whole thing started because of my hair scarf. I have 4C hair, which means it's really tightly coiled. And if I don't take care of it right, it turns into a nightmare. It breaks easy, tangles like crazy, and I've been growing it out, so now it's past my shoulders. I started wrapping it up at night in a satin scarf because I also use oils now, and I'm not about to ruin my pillowcases with that stuff. First night, I wore the scarf to bed. My husband looks at me in my nightgown and scarf and goes, "You look like a slave." I'll admit, I kind of laughed because, yeah, the combo was a bit much, so I let it slide. But then it didn't stop. Every single night after that, he'd make some comment. "Are we doing the slave thing tonight? Or should I help you into bed, Grandma?" At first, I thought he was just being dumb and would get over it. But it kept going. I explained to him why I wore it, how my hair works, why it's important, and he'd nod along like he got it. But then the jokes would start up again the next night. This went on for like 3 weeks. 3 weeks of the same stupid comments every time I got ready for bed. I started getting annoyed, but I didn't want to make it a huge deal. You know, I figured he'd eventually just get used to seeing me in the scarf and move on. But nope, last Tuesday night I'm getting ready for bed and I can't find my scarf anywhere. I checked the bathroom, the dresser, under the bed, everywhere. So I asked him if he'd seen it, and he gets this grin on his face and says, "Yeah, I hid it." I thought he was joking at first, so I was like, "Okay, where is it?" And he just shrugs and says, "I'm not telling you." I could feel myself getting mad, but I tried to stay calm. I asked him again, and he goes, "Come on, just sleep without it tonight. I want to run my fingers through your hair." That's when I lost it. I told him if he wanted to run his fingers through someone's hair so bad, he should have just married a white woman. The second it came out of my mouth, the whole room went dead silent. He stared at me for a few seconds, then got up, walked to the closet, and pulled my scarf out from behind some boxes. He didn't say anything, just handed it to me and went to bed. The next morning was so awkward. He barely looked at me during breakfast, and when he finally did talk, he said we needed to go to couples counseling for our race issues. I was like, "What races?" He said I made him feel racist and that clearly we had some deeper problems we needed to work through. I told him I didn't think it was that serious and I wasn't trying to call him racist. I was just mad that he hid my scarf and wouldn't stop making jokes. He said it didn't matter what I meant. That's how it made him feel. We've been going back and forth about this for almost a week for weeks. I had been quietly swallowing the comments, telling myself they weren't worth a fight. But every night it was the same. My scarf became a punchline instead of something my husband respected. What he didn't understand was that my scarf wasn't just fabric. It was protection. It was care. It was me finally learning how to love my hair instead of fighting it every single day. And for him to mock it, even playfully, cut deeper than I realized. The night he hit it was the breaking point. It wasn't about the scarf anymore. It was about control. About him deciding what parts of me were acceptable and what parts were laughable. When I said, "You should have married a white woman," it slipped out raw, unfiltered, like all the weight of 3 weeks finally snapped loose. I wasn't trying to brand him as racist. I was trying to defend myself in the only way my anger knew how. But the silence that followed was louder than any argument. His eyes dropped, his smile disappeared, and suddenly the joke wasn't funny anymore. He dug the scarf out like it was evidence, shoved it into my hand, and climbed into bed without another word. That silence stretched into the morning, into our coffee, into the spaces where laughter usually lived. When he finally spoke, he framed it as his pain, saying I made him feel racist. Like the problem wasn't the words he used against me, but the one line I threw back at him. Now we sit across from each other like strangers, both stubborn, both hurt. He talks about counseling, about race issues, about being misunderstood. And I'm left wondering, why did it take one sentence for me to wake him up, when I endured weeks of his comments without him ever seeing how much they hurt? This isn't just about hair. It's about respect. And I don't know yet if he truly understands that. Story 2 at my husband's family. BBQ, my husband's sister, made a joke. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Everyone laughed except me. I just raised my hot dog and said, "Challenge accepted." I moved out that night, cut contact, and vanished. A year later, there who's forgotten now? Chapter 1, the joke that crossed the line. The smoke from the grill curled into the summer sky, carrying the smell of burgers and ribs. My husband's family filled the backyard with loud voices, clinking glasses, and fake laughter. I'd learned to endure their jokes over the years. The subtle digs about my career, the rolling eyes when I spoke, the way they'd close ranks to make sure I always felt like the outsider. But that day at the family BBQ, my husband's sister took it further. She leaned back in her chair, her wine glass catching the light, and said with a smirk, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." The laughter was instant. My husband chuckled. His parents laughed. Even the cousins joined in as if cruelty was part of the entertainment. I sat there, the paper plate warm in my hands, the hot dog halfway to my mouth. My face felt like stone, but inside a fire roared. I raised the hot dog slowly, calmly, like I was making a toast, and said, "Challenge accepted." Silence fell for just a second. But then the laughter picked back up. They thought I was playing along. They thought I was harmless. That night, when the laughter faded and everyone went home, I packed a single bag. No fights, no tears, no explanations. Just quiet. By morning, I was gone. Cut off. No calls, no visits, no explanations. I vanished. Not into despair, but into a plan. And while they laughed over that barbecue, they had no idea that a year later they'd be the ones forgotten. Chapter 2: The Vanishing Act. For the first few weeks, they probably didn't notice. Why would they? I had always been the one bending, adjusting, filling in the silence while they mocked. This time there was no bending. No texts, no calls, no social media posts. It was like I had dissolved into thin air. But in reality, I was watching. I changed my number, closed old accounts, sold my car under a friend's name. I quietly moved 2 states away and started over. The money I had saved over the years, the very thing they'd mocked me for being cheap about, became the foundation of my new life. I rented a small place, picked up consulting work they had no idea I was qualified for, and poured myself into becoming stronger mentally, financially, emotionally. Meanwhile, cracks began forming in their perfect little circle. My husband's sister, the same one who had humiliated me at the barbecue, was posting cryptic Facebook updates about fake friends and people using her. My husband, from what mutual acquaintances whispered, had been stumbling into work late, unshaven, looking like a man whose world was shrinking, and the in-laws, the endless parties, the smug social photos, they grew fewer and fewer. You see, when I left, I didn't just disappear. I pulled my quiet contributions with me, the little loans I used to give, the babysitting I always did for their kids, the chores they never noticed until they weren't done anymore. One by one, the props holding up their little kingdom crumbled, and the best part, they didn't even realize yet that I was the one who'd set the clock ticking on their downfall. Because the real revenge wasn't in vanishing. It was in coming back when the time was right. Not as the forgotten outsider, but as the one they could no longer ignore. Chapter 3: Cracks in Their Castle. By month 6, the silence I had left behind wasn't peaceful for them anymore. It was deafening. The family that once mocked me for being invisible started noticing just how visible I had been in their lives. My husband's sister was drowning. Without me covering her shifts, watching her kids, or bailing her out with loans, she was posting desperate pleas for help online. "Family should always support each other," she wrote bitterly, the comments dead silent. My mother-in-law's garden parties, once the highlight of her year, had stopped entirely. Nobody showed up after word spread about unpaid catering bills. Turns out the one quietly settling those bills, me and my husband. He had been evicted from his rented apartment. Apparently, I hadn't just been his wife. I had been his financial safety net. While they floundered, I thrived. The consulting work I'd started had turned into a full-fledged business. My savings had doubled, then tripled. For the first time in years, I didn't just have freedom. I had power. And that's when I decided to return. Not dramatically, not with fireworks, just a simple appearance that would shake their fragile egos to the core. I showed up at a community fundraiser, the kind of event my in-laws once strutted through like royalty. I didn't announce myself. I simply signed a check larger than any donation they had ever given and handed it to the host. The whispers started immediately. "Is that her? Didn't they say she was gone? Wait, how is she writing checks like that?" My sister-in-law's face went white when she spotted me. My husband froze, beer halfway to his lips. And my mother-in-law, she tried to stand, but her knees buckled and she sat back down hard. For the first time, they weren't laughing. For the first time, they were speechless. And I just smiled, nodded politely, and walked away, leaving them to choke on the taste of their own forgotten words. Chapter 4: The Reckoning. The fundraiser had only been the opening move. I hadn't come back just to flash wealth. I came back to remind them that ghosts don't stay buried when they're owed justice. A week later, the whispers had already spread through town. My old in-laws, once smug and untouchable, were now the subject of hushed gossip at grocery stores and PTA meetings. But I wasn't done. I hired a quiet hand, a PR specialist who knew how to let truths breathe. All it took was a few subtle nudges. Copies of unpaid invoices tied to my sister-in-law's business. A landlord's eviction notice conveniently passed along to her neighbors. My husband's credit card debt splashed across an anonymous financial forum. Nothing illegal, just truth, raw and unvarnished. The dominoes fell fast. Sister-in-law's job gone after her boss caught wind of her financial mess and how she'd been pawning company resources. Mother-in-law's reputation shattered after the garden club discovered she'd been living off donations meant for community projects. My husband completely alone once his so-called friends realized he couldn't even buy his own beer without borrowing money. Meanwhile, I thrived in silence. The new business I'd built had earned me local awards. My name appeared in the paper, not as a footnote, but as the main feature. When people saw me at community events now, they didn't whisper out of mockery. They whispered out of respect. And the family who once claimed, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would notice. Now they were the ones who had vanished from every guest list, every invitation, every circle of influence. Forgotten just as I promised. Chapter 5, The Final Confrontation. It was a chilly Sunday morning when I heard the knock at my door. Not a polite tap, but a desperate, ragged pounding. I already knew who it was when I opened it. There stood my husband, his sister, and their mother. Gone were the smug grins, the superior air. They looked worn, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow, skin pale from too many sleepless nights. "Please," my sister-in-law whispered, her voice trembling. "We need your help. You've got connections. You can fix this." My husband stepped forward, trying to muster the authority he once wielded over me. "You've made your point. Enough is enough. Help us rebuild." I leaned against the doorframe, calm and collected, letting them see the life they'd mocked me for supposedly never achieving. The nice home, the new car parked out front, the peace written across my face. "You know," I said slowly, "there was a time when I might have forgiven you. But then I remembered your words. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." Their faces drained of color. I continued, voice sharp now. "Well, congratulations. You got your wish. I disappeared, and guess what? No one noticed you disappearing either. The world moved on without you. You're the forgotten ones now." My husband's mother reached for my hand, whispering, "Please, we're family." I pulled my hand back. Family doesn't laugh when you're humiliated. Family doesn't bury you like trash. Family doesn't throw you out and expect you to crawl back. I let the silence stretch, watching them squirm. Then I said the final words, crisp and merciless. "You taught me what I was worth to you. Now you'll live with what you're worth to me." And with that, I closed the door. That was the last time I saw them. Rumors say they've been struggling ever since, moving from rental to rental, begging favors that no one grants. Meanwhile, I've never been freer. The lesson. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't in shouting or fighting back. It's in proving that you don't need them while they can't survive without you. Epilogue. A year later. 1 year passed. I was sitting in a quiet cafe, sipping my coffee, scrolling through emails from clients who valued me, when I overheard a familiar voice outside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced through the window. There they were, my husband's family. My sister-in-law, once the loudest in the room, now looked 10 years older, dragging her feet in cheap clothes that didn't fit. My husband's mother was arguing with a landlord, begging for an extension on rent. My husband himself just a shadow of the arrogant man he used to be. They hadn't seen me yet. For a moment, I just watched, remembering that barbecue night when they laughed as if I were disposable. Then my phone buzzed. A message from one of my new colleagues in the company I'd built from scratch after leaving. "Congrats again on closing the London contract. Next step, global expansion." I smiled, stood up, and walked past them. My sister-in-law's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, please. Can we talk?" she stammered. I didn't even slow down. I just looked her in the eye and said, "Remember that night you said no one would notice if I disappeared? You were right. No one noticed you disappearing either." I left them standing there, stunned and broken, while I walked back into a life they could never touch again. The real revenge wasn't in hurting them. It was in proving that I never needed them. And now they'll spend the rest of their lives wishing they still had me. Was this revenge perfectly justified? Or should the storm have raged harder? Drop your verdict below. I read every single one. Hit like if you crave justice and share this story with someone who needs its fire. Subscribe to Revenge Exposed because here betrayals don't sleep. They hunt their owners. Every shadow hides a reckoning. Every mask breaks and every betrayal is answered. Stay sharp. Stay unbroken. Stay tuned.